Welcome to Tea Time with Shayleigh and Amber. I'm Shayleigh Evans, and I'm a life coach for pets and their people. I'm a truth seeker, and it's my passion to empower others and to give animals a voice along the way.
I'm Amber Leidick, and I've been a performance horse trainer focused on behavioral issues for over 20 years. My current passion is creating impactful in-person and online events and collaborating with professionals to be on the leading edge of positive change in the horse industry.
We are two friends invested in theta healing, belief system work, animal communication, and any resources that benefit human-animal partnerships. So turn up the volume and let's dive into the Great Awakening, brought to you by our horses. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the podcast. We have an awesome guest. I'm biased. She's one of my best friends on the podcast today, Dr. Barbara Parks. Thanks for joining us, Barb.
Thanks for having me.
It's so fun. If you're not watching this YouTube, she's sitting directly next to me, which is fun. Little verbal note, my Wi-Fi is unstable and it keeps reminding me that it's unstable by popping up on my screen. So if I cut in and out, just bear with me. Maybe the universe is trying to tell me to say less ums and less likes on this episode. Who knows? So Barb is a human and equine physical therapist, but she kind of does like a hodgepodge of things. She's like the perfect little blend of science and energy work and all the fun things. So do you want to kind of explain a little bit about like where you're at in your career, what you do?
Sure.
Cool.
It's kind of hard to explain what I do. I feel like people always ask me what I do, and then I don't know how to explain it. So I will try, and we'll probably
Welcome to the club.
yeah, we'll like tease it apart as we talk more probably. But so physical therapy is the label, right? Human PT first, and then there's like a continuing education certification to be able to apply it to horses. But I also finished that certification and was working and trying to do stuff. And I still just was very aware of how much I was missing. And some horses were getting better, but other cases just like were stagnant, and just became very apparent to me that there was more I needed to learn. So I've kind of dove down various rabbit holes of nutrition and hoof care and dental care. And then I happened to meet Shayleigh, who like sent me down more rabbit holes. Like the fact that she described me as having an energy work component is very interesting, because prior to meeting Shayleigh, I don't know that anyone would have ever said that about me. Like very science-based at my core. And then I'm like, okay, this girl's an animal communicator. She seems cool. I'll be open-minded. And like now I'm way over here telling people to like send energy with homework, bodywork techniques and stuff. But so yeah, like I do body work, I do training, I do clicker training, I do rehabilitation in terms of like I have a track system at my house, and we do hoof rehab, and we do all the things. So that's a big, vague, non-answer answer to what do I do.
Yeah, I love it. And one of the things that I think you are really big on, and it would be cool for us to talk about a little bit, is environment, because we know so many horses are in the wrong environment, and you have a track system, and, you know, just kind of going down the rabbit hole of, I guess I don't want to leave like too broad of a question, but I have two questions. What are like the pattern, like if you were to say like two things that you see in almost every single horse that you see, what would those be? And I know I'm like two things, just I mean, okay. I'm just curious because, you know, in my work, I feel like I'm just curious if it's going to coincide, because we talk, but we don't talk all that, like we don't talk about our client.
Sure.
So it's curious to see if we notice the same patterns, and also, you know, how environment plays a role in just like your perspective on environment and why you've created the track system and all of that stuff.
So when you said you didn't have any plans of what to ask me, it did not worry me, because I feel like you know my soapbox favorite topics. So let's just start with the first one. So in terms of environment, I feel like it makes me want to tell Malachi's story. because it's super relevant to my personal current life, and it illustrates this like really well, I think. So this horse, I was working with the owner and this horse for like a year, maybe longer, at her home, and it was him, and he had one companion. And like by all accounts, the owner had created the perfect environment. The barn was open, they could come in and out. She had a dry lot area that was large for two horses, very large. The fans in the summer, it was warm and insulated in the winter. They could go out on grass when it was appropriate. Like it seemed like it should be perfect. And for some reason, the two horses, neither of them were thriving. And I was involved. It's not like I wasn't trying to help. It's not, she was doing all the right things, but it just, we were stagnant and they were kind of getting worse. And then we had this situation where it really got worse, and the one horse foundered. And so then it became a question of like, do we put him down or do we do something kind of drastic? And so we went with something kind of drastic, and she moved them both to my house, which I didn't really want to do because it was the middle of winter, and it's hard in the middle of winter because it's muddy and like it's not. Anyways, I was then gonna be like having 9 horses at my house, which is a lot for me, but we did it anyways. And it just like absolutely made all the difference in the world. He completely has turned around. He's his feet are rehabbing. We did change farriers. Like, she's amazing. And I think that is a large piece of what was helpful. But I also think the change in environment to a larger herd, he was getting more movement just throughout the day. He had more stuff going on. Like, he was so hyper vigilant at home. Every little sound around the property, he was just on high alert, and he's a cribber. So he was cribbing like crazy. And then he came to my house where it's just quiet, like it's a little more insulated feeling. I think they tend to feel safer. And he had this herd surrounding him that made him feel safe also. And that hypervigilance just left. And I think he could never heal physically because emotionally he was a disaster. And that was not her fault. Like, she had done absolutely everything right by any account. But the environment still wasn't what he needed. And that's hard for a lot of people to hear and believe, because they're looking at what they've created and they're like, why this should work? Why would yours be different? And the herd environment, I think, is massively underrated.
I think a lot of people don't put enough like emphasis and value on their like equine friends and their herd. And I noticed that a lot in my work too, where, you know, a horse will bring up a horse that they are not even like they, you know, they're not even pastured with, and the person will be like, oh my gosh, weird, like why is that horse connected to my horse?
Interesting side note about that, I was at that conference a couple weeks ago, and 2 horses came from the same barn, but they were not friends, supposedly, right? And then as soon as they were in the same barn at this conference, they could not stop calling to each other and looking for each other. And they're like, they're not friends. This shouldn't be. And I'm like, well, they are friends, clearly. Like they are. So.
Yeah. And I feel like, and I'm curious too for you, Amber, and then we'll get back to like the body question. But
I'll answer my
yeah, I'm curious like how you, because obviously you guys have a boarding barn. It's just so interesting to me because sometimes I feel like people will give up too quickly and they'll be like, this horse isn't for me. They don't like the job. They don't like this. They're in pain. They're blah, blah, blah. And like sometimes it literally is the environment, and like just it's interesting because most people won't try moving barn. They'll like sell their horse before moving barns. It's so wild. But like, what's your experience? I know you play matchmaker with the herds at your farm. Your farm is just like different because you play matchmaker and everyone's just in like their magical little bubbles. But like, how are you feeling about this conversation?
I feel like it makes a huge difference because I have trained at barns where there isn't that, right? And I think the most underrated thing that people sort of forget is the nervous system. Like, I don't think people actually understand the importance of it and the effects of like just having that dysregulated nervous system, how it affects literally everything. And being locked in a stall and like You're never going to get the peak performance or whatever you think you want from your horse, having it be in a space where it's like, stressed. And so it should be almost the first priority environment, like should be the number one thing before training, before all the things. But at our barn, it's like they come into their stalls at night so we can adjust how much they're eating. They get their grain or supplements or whatever. And then during the day, they eat breakfast together. And it's interesting because I don't know if it's just because I've willed it this way, but we've only several times had to move a horse out of a pasture. Like, I think people really feel like they need so much control over horses and how they're going to get along. And I am mindful, like we do have a couple horses that are like big personalities, and some of them are older, and you're going to put them together and they may get along and play, and one may be speaking clear. We have a little Icelandic Bastion who's like 23, and he's like the best, but he thinks he is like a 5-year-old stallion, and he's going to tell everyone about it. So he gets into it and he plays really hard, which is great, but also horses will land on him and they like, and he loves it. But I'm like, we're not trying to kill the pony. So, but I think people don't understand that these are horses. They know how to horse with each other. You don't need to be out there intervening. And I do know that before we took over that property, what would happen is they would integrate a horse in, and all of the boarders would be there out in the pasture with like flags and like all these things. And I'm like, get out. Like, we like to do it at breakfast time after the horses have met, for depending on the personality of the horse. Sometimes we just throw them out. Sometimes they've never been in a herd, so you kind of do it different. But you throw them out there, they eat, they're distracted halfway with eating, meeting each other, also food. So it creates, but we don't do it with anyone out there. Like, we give the owner the option, like, if you want to come out, we're going to do it at 6:30 in the morning. So they're like, oh no, it'll be fine, just take videos. But their ability to like figure it out is it's like there. And I don't know why humans think that they need to interject and move all the pieces and control the entire situation. Really, you just get in the way and you actually disrupt the communications and what's going on. So
And I think that we rush the process sometimes too. And that's when people had like issues pop up and then they're like, well, that didn't work, I'm never doing that again. Which I have on my track, there's narrow portions that they have to get along, or we could potentially have dangerous situations pop up. So I do not just like toss them in together and say, figure it out, especially because I'm usually bringing in horses who are super dysregulated and all over the place. And like, it's just not a great choice. But everywhere I've ever boarded before I had my own place, I brought my horses in the day that I brought them there, and we just turned them out into the herd and said, best of luck to you. And it was okay, but also that can sometimes not be okay, because we are not taking into account the social aspect of the herd. So I try to keep them, like when I bring a horse in at my house, I put them in a paddock where they can see everybody and maybe touch noses right away, or maybe not if they're super having a hard time with it. And then we just kind of slowly build up, and then we'll start putting one horse in with them or two and build it up that way. And then by the time they're in with the whole herd, it's absolutely not an issue. But I'm taking like sometimes up to a month to fully integrate everybody. And not every boarding facility is willing or able to do that, which I understand. But it has made a massive difference for me, which leads me to my two things. So I want to make sure I answer that. The two biggest things is the social connections between the herd, because we manipulate that like crazy. And so we're building and breaking connections for them and then thinking that it's no big deal when it really is a big deal. And movement, how much casual self-directed movement are they getting throughout the day? So stall time often is required for everybody getting their food, or managing our pastures and whatnot. But if they're parked at a round bale all day long and no one's moving, or in the boys at my house now, they were just around the barn, they had no one encouraging them to go anywhere else. The two of them were just happy to stand and they weren't moving. So the horses, we know this, are designed to move, and when they are stagnant, things just like it falls apart.
Definitely. And you know what's interesting too is I have talked to several horses who have told me that they've lost their joy for movement. And sometimes that can be like human manipulation, like humans have ridden them in a way that has just like ruined the fun. And so sometimes it's in that aspect. But it always surprises me when like a retired horse or a horse that's not being ridden tells me like, oh yeah, I've lost my joy for movement. And I'm like, wow, that's so fascinating. So then you get into like the pain. And a lot of times it relates to grief around missing a herd member. And it's either at like a previous barn or it's a herd mate that's coming and going. And like you said, like we manipulate their connections all the time, taking horses to shows, like going in and out. I would say one of the number one requests that I have is like, can I have a consistent partner next to me? Because if I don't have a consistent partner, I'm more stressed. Like, I think people don't realize how deeply connected they are, which is so weird because what are all the humans are looking for love over here? You know, like everyone's trying to find their freaking one partner, so monogamous. And then it's weird because humans also have this attachment to their animals where it's like, I'm never going to let you go. Like, you're always going to be with me, and we're partners for life. And I don't sell my animals. And like, humans want these deep connections. And then when it comes to like our horses, we rip them away from them all the time. It's so weird. So, so I guess my next question, like just talking about environment and everything and how it connects to the body, what are some things that you like typically notice in horses that do have significant nervous system issues or who are kind of like, I don't want to say victim, but I'm going to use that word to like a dysregulated environment?
Sure.
And I know that's a general question.
It is. It's kind of a hard question, but it's a good question because that is a lot of what I see. And it does tend, how do I want to answer this? It tends to come out in kind of like global dysfunction patterns. So not like one little nagging issue, but like globally, everything is jacked up. So back pain is a big one because they tend to be in that like extension posture because they're constantly in like fight or flight, anxious, sympathetic nervous system place. And that just puts them in that extended posture. And then they're doing all the riding and all the things. And I think a lot of your people probably know kind of what that ends up doing. Like everything gets pinchy and we get a lot of pain. And then as a result of that, all kinds of other things can happen. Hoof imbalance, hoof pain. A lot of times horses in those environments do not have healthy diet or healthy movement or healthy hoof care. And so that's another confounding piece that could be its own problem or a symptom of the other stuff. Hind end gets tight and stiff and sore, and pole dental stuff. It's like it tends to be like a really big picture problem. And then when I come in and it's really hard for the owner sometimes because I come in and I'm like, well, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, 25 problems. And don't panic because we can fix it. But it does then require a team approach to fix. Like, again, I'll just come back to Malachi because he's so relevant for me right now. I could not just fix him on my own. We had to have dental balance. The vet was involved to make sure he was stable medically. The farrier super involved, owner super involved. Like it, without all of that, I don't think we would have had the success that we've had. The environment, my own herd is super involved. Like they've played a huge role. So it ends up being, big picture.
Well, and how much do you think, continuing education and like your thirst for knowledge plays into that? Because I feel like a lot of my clients that I talk to where their horses are in chronic pain, they would hear that and they would say, well, I did do all that. I did have the x-rays. I did have all of this. I have a whole team behind my horse and everyone's telling me the horse is okay.
Yeah. Okay. That's another story from literally today. I had that situation. I have that situation often. I also had it this morning. So it's hard because we're people are coming from a lot of different places, right? We all have our different educational background. We've all had our different experiences and the way that we've always done things we've had success with. And so depending on what barn environment people might be at, they have everybody telling them what to do. And that may or may not be what I would want to do. It's usually not what I would want to do. That's okay. So it has pushed me. There's two reasons why I pursue education like a psycho person. One is imposter syndrome. Two is complicated cases where I knew things were missing and everybody's telling me it's all fine. And I'm like, well, I need to now know how to look at this x-ray and decide for myself if it's truly fine or not. And if I didn't ever pursue that and or like let me learn about nutrition and see what really I think is a good idea for these horses or any number of these things, if I can't look at it with my own fresh perspective, then I was just having to believe people and it just wasn't doing enough for everybody. So yeah, it sent me down a lot of rabbit holes. A lot of rabbit holes.
Well, and Amber and I talk a lot about that, like, calling your power back and making your own decision and empowering your clients to make their own decision.
It is too, right? Because now I can educate the owner and have them learn for themselves too and point them in the right direction of things to learn. And now they can make their own better decisions for themselves, not just blindly even listen to me, because I think I'm usually right, but I'd rather them like fully understand why I'm right, not just blindly follow it. So yeah, the power of the client's huge.
Yeah, and I think that's the piece where I think people get a little confused when we talk about calling your power back and like educating yourself around these important things is like not to get rid of the professionals. Like we're not saying you're going to go do the things, but you're the only one that knows your horse. You're with your horse all the time. Intuitively, you're going to know as soon as someone says something, if it feels right and in alignment or not. And the ability to say, okay, I'm just going to take a step back and really feel into this and then either go learn more or talk to somebody who is a specialist of that and being able to say that and advocate for their horse and their situation when they just have a feeling like, I don't know, this doesn't feel right.
Well, and having professionals who want the owner's feedback, because sometimes owners are a lot like you guys have a lot coming out at me, and that I understand why some professionals kind of shut off to that. But you gotta want the owner's feedback because they spend the most time with this horse. They're gonna pick up on the subtle stuff that I may not notice when I'm there once a month, like finding professionals who want you as the owner involved, then I think just helps all of that align.
Yeah. And it holds the professionals accountable because I know a lot of people, I know professionals and some of it's just their mindset and their view through it is like they don't know. The owners always think they know. These are not like people that are my friends. These are just people that I've like been in my past where I've been like,
we all know people like that.
Right. So you hear that conversation and you're like, well, if your vibe is, you don't know, and they're just so dismissive. So it's like, why?
If you don't know, like, can we teach them? So now they do know, like, wouldn't that be a better option?
Right. Yeah.
Opinion?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I think it kind of holds the professional accountable if the owner is like, oh, that's interesting. And you're able to ask specific questions to your farrier or to your dentist or to the vet or whatever, just in a space of like, I'm just curious. This is what I've learned about this. Like, how do you feel about that? So you're not just blindly saying yes, because everyone are humans. Professionals are humans. Professionals are also learning and limited and things are always evolving. So
yeah,
that piece is important as who you're picking to support your horse and that team.
So Amber, I can't remember how you worded, but this just like popped into my mind because I'm thinking of the event that we're doing. Well, I feel like you're doing it and I'm tagging along. It's like Batman and Robin situation over here. But I'm thinking about the Art of Equine Alchemy podcast and I'm just thinking of this because obviously Barb is one of my best friends and I know her passion about the industry like as a whole. And like, she's not just like, wanting to go around and PTing horses. She's like hardcore, like the industry is going to change. Can you ask her the question that you asked us on the pod? I can't remember exactly how you worded it about like the industry and changing the industry, or I think it's like, what do you want to see different? Or do you remember what it was?
Yeah, it was the very last question, which is hard because it's so broad because there are a lot of things.
I
Um,
like questions.
yeah, well, there was a couple of other questions there, but the last question was if there was one thing that you could change, like if you had a magic wand within the industry, like what would it be?
Hmm. Okay. That is a hard
A big
question.
one. It's a big one.
It is big. It's hard. Anytime anyone asks me for like a favorite or to pick one thing or two things, I'm like, I cannot do that because there's so many things, which is fine. I'm a big picture person. But I what I always say, I don't know what this has like become my mantra is that I just want to radically change like the baseline level of equine care and what we perceive as normal in our industry. So to me, that is owner education first and foremost, and then also other professionals being more educated in the big picture approach. But I would say access to well-rounded education for horse owners so that we're not just doing the thing we've always done because we've always done it. Maybe we're thinking a little more critically about the stuff that we're doing, the type of training we're doing, the type of food we're feeding, the type of professionals we're involving in our horses' care, the environment that we are keeping our horses in. Just I want owners to have a baseline understanding, not because they have to be that professional for their horses, but just so that they know why they're doing what they're doing rather than blindly doing what everyone just does.
You know
Yeah.
what's tough about that though is that,
Everything.
yeah, and Amber and I do talk about this a lot because with that comes radical responsibility and accountability.
Yeah.
And you can no longer, like, if you are educated on XYZ, you can no
Sometimes it
longer
sucks.
sweep things under the rug. Yeah, like you can't.
Yeah, I think we live that every day. We're like, damn it, I am seeing all this stuff in my own horses that I used to never notice, and now it's driving me crazy because I'm seeing it and I'm not sure how to fix it. Yeah, it is. And it's a really big ask because I run into this too, where the horse time is the human's therapy. And if I now say you have to therapy your horse, they're not your therapy right now. You have to do what they need. That is tough. It's really tough. And it's not that the owner is selfish. It's just that was their outlet. And now I've taken that from them and I haven't necessarily replaced it with anything else. So having that mindset shift of that responsibility and yeah, I don't have the answers for how to make it happen. It's just where I'm headed for the rest of my life, probably.
Well, you know what? And
Where
that's why I feel like that piece where you're saying, now I've taken the thing that you have been using to, either make you feel good or escape your whatever it is. But that's like where the horses are teaching. Like that's the ego ratification. That's like the great awakening where it's like, now you're going to learn. You're going to learn reciprocity. You're going to learn how to give and receive. You're going to learn all of these deeper, more expansive lessons that far exceed, if you can get a clean lean change or your
yeah,
freaking half pass,
exactly.
like that's, like I think when we kind of talked about this, I don't remember, maybe it was the last Mystery Horse podcast where everything starts to sort of fall apart and you start to have to really look at the truth around how you feel, why you have who you have in your life, the horses, the people, whatever. But that's where all like this beautiful, like bigger picture growth happens. But I think people go, I'm just going to get this horse and it's going to be great. And we're going to go do the things. And the horse is like, perfect. You're ready. Oh, you're listening to me. Great. This is a perfect time. Let me show you all the things.
Well,
Let me teach you through my body if I have to.
like, oh, what a crazy, like, big responsibility now from what I just said, but where you guys are heading, like, opening up all of this spiritual level and like energy and awareness around your own psychology, that's a big rabbit hole full of personal responsibility too. So you guys are doing the same thing, slightly different path, but same thing.
It's so interesting because I talked to a horse today and this horse, like, this horse literally used Kip to describe like where he was in time and space right now. And I was like, ah, shit, man. Like this horse is using my horse from like 7 years ago. And I know exactly where you are right now. And she was like, yes, that's exactly. I was like, you're learning boundaries. You're learning this. You're just like in the freaking thick of it. But it's like this horse is young. She put it through training that she wasn't super happy with, and the horse wasn't super happy with. The horse kind of came, it's like a story that we're all really familiar with, or most of us are. Horse came back and has a lot of dysfunction and a lot of body soreness, a lot of like this and that. And he starts going down this like path of like reminding me where I was with Kip and where I still am sometimes. And I'm like, he can't drop the body stuff because you're hiding behind him. If you don't have all this stuff to hide behind, then who are you as his owner? And she's like, oh, I don't know how to train him correctly. And like, we went down this whole thing. And I was like, yep, because if he's in dysfunction, you can focus on the dysfunction. If he's like doing this, you have all of these little parts and pieces that you can hide behind. So you don't have to be like true and vulnerable. And we kind of talked about like the Joe Dispenza thing, the gap, where he says there's the person that you present yourself to the world as, there's how you really feel, and there's all that space in between, the guilt, the frustration, the this, the that. And he, in this book I'm reading, he's like, if you don't distract yourself with external stimulus, so it's just you laying in your bed, whatever, are you actually happy and this person that you present, or are you something different? And it's so wild because probably all of us are like something different. There's like, it's like the, I don't know what to call it, like saying or story or whatever, where it's like, oh, this person has a beautiful life. They have everything they want. They have money. They have a family. They have this and they have that. And somehow they're still depressed. And it's like,
or like you find out on 2020 that there was like some super dysfunctional story behind that whole family.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's kind of crazy how we like seek out pain. And then it's like, it's interesting because we get so fixated on our external world and like fixing our horses, and really like our horses are mirroring back like what's going on in our experience. And it's kind of wild because Fern was going through like a major issue.
Yeah.
And I was like I don't know what I was going through at the time, but I'm just like remembering how scrawny she looked. And I took a picture of her yesterday and I was like, damn girl, like you're looking good. You're all filled out. And like she probably hasn't changed that much, but like my perspective around her changed.
That's interesting.
Yeah. And I feel like that's such a big thing. And I know.
So it is for sure in my experience too, like what it brought up for me was thinking about owners who have a hard time transitioning their horses from rehab mode like back to more normal stuff. You're so used to something being broken, you're just like looking for stuff to be broken, and you're hyper fixated on what's going to be broken next, rather than being like, oh wow, look how much better you are, let's go try to do some new things. And I think there's a lot of fear there of like messing them up again, maybe, that hides behind that. But
well, and definitely an attachment to the story, because
yeah,
like how many times do we hear like, oh, my horse is a rescue?
Yeah.
Oh, how long have you had them? 8 years?
Yeah.
Okay, I don't really know if they're a rescue anymore at this point.
That's a great point. Yeah. Yep.
I do think that the stories, we talk about this a lot too. It's like, your horse's experience and with other people in your life and even experiences in your life, like we use those because we identify with them, they serve you somehow. So and I don't know if this is something that you've seen. Me, when I was training, I would see it a lot. And I actually started to become aware of it when I had this conversation with a chiropractor that would come out, where I was like, do you see like the same thing? Because what she had said was, I'm adjusting the same exact things on all three of your horses. You need to go to the chiropractor. And I was like, what? Like, it seems like it should be common sense that your body on your horse is going to affect your horse. Like, duh, right? But like that thought never occurred to me until that moment. And this is only like maybe 5 years ago. So I've been training horses a very long time. Body work to me, it didn't even occur to me after this many years of training, that was something that, like, I don't know how or why and what freaking wild universe I was existing in where I didn't make that connection is crazy. Because in my head, I was like, oh yeah, like body work is like relaxing and, and like, I don't know. So it was interesting that I was like, oh, okay. I started to open up. She's like, oh yeah. But then she moved into, she's like, I have so many stories. She's like, I even have a story where there was one of her clients that had 3 horses under, I want to say under 7 that all went neurological. She was a neurologist and was just like, and also I think she had a child that had some like it was crazy. And I was like, how is that? Like, what is that about? She's like, dude, I don't know. And I was like, why do people not talk about this? So it was like this whole thing that opened up. But also when you're talking about rehabbing from something like that, it's like you as a human have to unwind your whole story around it, or you're going to continue to manifest these things on a physical level, sure, but also like when I see people that would come to me that would have horses that were like very attached, had a lot of like attachment issues, more often than not, I would ask the owner, like, oh, or they would get injured all the time, or they had these chronic things. I was like, what do you do for a living? Oh, I'm a nurse. I'm like, that's interesting. Or, so there was all these like correlations of like, what happens if your horse isn't injured? When you ask those questions, they're a little bit like, oh, excuse me, but what happens if you have a horse that's sound and or the mounting block, the horses are anxious and someone's standing up there and, oh, I can't ever get on because what happens if your horse just stood there? Oh, I could just get on. Okay, what happens if you get on? Oh, then I have to ride and I'm in full shame because I don't want to be seen riding. It's like the mounting block issue is not the issue. The horse's lameness stuff is like a thing, but so it's like so wild how all of that stuff sort of ties in together. And I'm sure you see that because if you're doing people and horses
all the time, physically and the emotional component too, right? Because I'm thinking about people who tell me my horse cannot do this. We can't do fly spray. He doesn't like this. He doesn't like that. And I'm like, well, why not? Let's dig into that a little bit. And it usually turns out that that is not actually true. That's just something we've put on them because at some point that is what we perceived and we locked onto it and it was never going to change. And I don't know what it is about like human psychology where we feel like if something is this way, then it's going to be this way forever. And getting away from that and just like being open to things changing for better or worse, it is like a really resistance for a lot of people.
Yeah. What is Dr. Joe Dispenza says something, I don't know if it's come up yet, but he just says people will choose the familiar pain over the unfamiliar.
100%.
Yeah.
They choose, yeah, what is it? Like they choose the familiar discomfort over the unfamiliar like growth or whatever. And it's so true. People like to get really stuck in the story. We keep a story of like, and it's kind of crazy. So I like that he like kind of intertwines science too, because he talks about how our cells hold memory. And he's like, the reason why it's so hard to break an addiction, it's so hard to break out of this like chronic thought pattern or whatever, when you've been practicing a certain brainwave for so long and your cells become conditioned to getting like the dopamine or the high levels of cortisol, this ebb and flow of chemicals that they've been getting. As soon as you decide, I'm not going to feel this way anymore, I'm only going to be happy, and you cut off those chemicals, those cells immediately are like, like and then he's like, and then all of a sudden you're thinking about your dog dying when you're 9 years old and your brain is like getting a little, your brain's like getting a little hit of what it needs. That is why I'm constantly, I was actually just telling Barb, I was harping on one of our friends lately because I'm like, you need to meditate. Like you don't have time not to. And I tell that to everybody. I'm like, you do not have time not to meditate. Like when people are like, oh, I don't like it because it brings up this in me. I'm like, it's bringing up that in you for a reason. Like you need to start doing it. Even just like some mindful work, because if we never clear that mind chatter, we can tell ourselves all day long we're going to let go of the story and we're going to change, but we can't if there's not a break in that. And then we all know what happens when you can't. Then it's like, oh, I'm guilty and I suck and I can't take care of my horse and I'm ruining them. And it's like this whole spiral of things, when really it's like, you just quiet that for a second, you can make a lot of progress.
And you have to practice because it's like the neural pathways for like your thought patterns and the neural pathways for like movement patterns. I think about it kind of similarly, where we have the stuff we usually do are normal, and we've practiced that so many times. It's like water running through a drainage area, and it like makes a rut in one area. And the more that water goes that way, the deeper the rut is. It's the same with our like neural pathways with thought processes and physical movement neural pathways. And so when we have a deep rut, you've got to practice. If we want to change that rut, we need to practice the other one over and over and over and over and over and over and over again until that rut is deeper than the old rut, so that that can now become our default. And so the meditation, I think, is so huge, because if you don't practice and practice and practice and practice and practice, as soon as you get stressed, you're going to default back to the easiest one to fall into.
Yeah. And it's so interesting too, because not to get on a Joe Dispenza, shout out Joe Dispenza.
Like, I haven't read this book, but maybe I should.
You should.
Add it to my file.
It's so cool because he talks about how he gives many examples in that book. And we've read some other books, Amber and I have, about like this same theory, where you can, as long as you pair a visualization with the feeling of it, for if you did it for an hour a day for 4 weeks. So he had an example, like someone played the piano for an hour a day for 4 weeks. The other person practiced visualizing playing the piano, and the people who played the piano versus the people who didn't, there was only like a 10% margin. Like
there's a sports psychology thing about that, with people like visualizing free throw shots and people who actually practice free throw shots, and like their performance ends up being very similar.
It's wild that the brain
super cool.
Know the difference.
Really
It's really
brains are.
Why are we not using them? I know. Brains are awesome. Why aren't we using them?
Because also I just heard like, and we just talked about this last night, like the small ass percentage that we actually use our brains is like wild. It's like so small. Like imagine if we could get to just like 20% what we could do.
There's got to be a reason, because we'd probably destroy the world faster than the trees could grow, and like everything
has to hold us back just a little bit.
Yeah.
I also feel like the Dr. Joe Dispenza, I found him probably 4 years ago, and that was who like for the first time understood like nervousness. I think I remember going live on my old Facebook group and being like, "Oh my God, you guys, like, oh my God, do you know where you can't absorb information or learn anything when you're in your sympathetic? We literally put horses in their sympathetic state and teach them things. We think repetition." I was like, they don't even know what. I was like,
that's why you think you have to be so consistent every day for the rest of your life for them to remember anything. Because they can't.
I like broke my brain that day that I listened to that video of his. I took notes and was like, wait a minute. Like, and then when I found Peter Levine, I read that book with body worker. She was Masterson. Sandy, we did it together, and we both came together and I was like, we are literally inputting trauma into horses when we train them. Like, that is how you put trauma in a body. I was like, we're like bringing them up and restricting them. And I was like, that's trauma. And I was like, my brain broke again. I was like, wait a minute, like, how can this be? So
yeah, it's really painful when you have those realizations and realize that that's what you've been doing your whole life, because that happened to me too. Yeah. And then you have to like become a beginner again and learn how to do it different. So I'm always very impressed with people when they are willing to do that, because that's a big change you got to make.
Yeah. And I feel like, you go down that journey, and also you have to break up with riding for a little bit to do it. Like almost everyone I know, you legitimately have to break up with riding your horses. And that is so tough. And I was just talking to someone the other day that was like, oh, I'm feeling so guilty because I'm so tired today, and I'm not working any of my horses. And it's like, oh my gosh, I had to break up with that mindset too, where I felt like I had to work them so much, or they were going to fall apart, or they weren't going to stay fit. There's all this energy around like getting them fit.
Which again, if you stall your horses all day long, you do need to ride them every day. If that's the only exercise they're getting, you do. And I think that's kind of where originally that mindset came from, is the way we had to keep horses. You really did have to provide them with the exercise if you weren't going to let them get it themselves. But hopefully now most of us are giving our horses turnout opportunities. We don't have to do that quite so much.
Mm-hmm.
And again, where the environment comes in with my rehab stuff, having them on the track, they're moving all day long. Like my horses are much more fit now at baseline than they used to be just out in a field with me riding, because they are keeping themselves going a little more normally.
Yeah. So this is a little bit of a squirrel, but do you find that, and I'm just like going back to the body and seeing the bigger picture, I'm thinking about inflammation and just everything. Do you find now in your journey where you are that you are making more or less physical inputs in the horses'
I think
bodies?
you know the answer to this. I'm glad you asked the question.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. I'm gonna answer this kind of weird way. When I first started, again, I'm gonna bring up imposter syndrome one more time. I felt like I had to prove to the owners that I was doing something. So stretches, exercises that looked impressive, like I really wanted people to buy in. I'm doing this thing that no one's heard of, physical therapist for horses, like no one knows what that is. Still don't most of the time. So I really felt this need to prove myself and my value. And that was cool and all, but like it wasn't really serving me the way I wanted it to. And as I've evolved with what I'm doing, now the bodywork stuff that I'm doing and a lot of the training stuff that I'm doing looks like a whole lot of nothing. Like, you didn't know what you were looking for, you'd be like, why did I just pay you all that money for you to just like hold your hands on my horses? But I'm seeing better results with that because I'm asking the horse to actually do the thing. I'm not manipulating the horse's body. I don't even know how to put words to this. I am asking them for the thing that I think they should do and then letting them fill that space. So rather than me doing, let's say, a belly lift by raking hoof picks across their belly and looking for this big arch. I used to do that a ton. I have educational material that I put out teaching people how to do that. And I do not do that anymore. Now I'm like, can you lift? Can you lift? And it looks like nothing a lot of the time. But it transfers over better because the horse owns that movement now. They are feeling it. It's not a reflex like shying away, because what I don't want the horse to learn that when I push him over, he should move over. Then I have to keep pushing him over for him to put weight in that other leg. I want him to say, oh, in this situation, I should shift more weight onto this leg so that then I can abduct my other one better, so that he can do that on his own out in the field or when we're riding. But if I always have to like hold him together with pressure, I always have to hold him together with pressure. And that's not nearly as helpful. So I feel like I've lost the question now, and
Doing less now.
doing less, yes.
Well,
Different though.
Now I'm lost in my words. Where am I?
It looks like less, but I don't know that it actually is less. It's just it has become more energetic, and it has become more like trying to actually communicate with the horse rather than impart my human desire on them.
well, yeah, and I had an ulterior motive with that question because, well, one, I knew the answer, but our listeners don't know the answer, okay?
Yeah, exactly.
Want them to know where you're coming from
Yeah.
because if they want to use you. And also, obviously, the Great Awakening, which I love, which is the shift away from entitlement. So like I am not entitled to your body, your mind, your state of being.
Yeah.
So seeing, when you're doing less and you're saying the horse is filling the gap, they're choosing whether they can or can't.
Yeah.
They're choosing whether they want to or not. And then it's, I think, helping you be more creative too, because if you can't, then why not?
Yeah.
And it's all led by the horse versus manipulation. So I love that
Said
because
that really nicely.
yeah, because I know, and we haven't talked about like how I've been like waiting to get you on the podcast. And like your work is actually really aligned with the Great Awakening, which I love. We've just never talked about it that way, but it's totally like a shift away from entitlement to their bodies. And it's,
something I have to work with my owners a lot on is giving them permission to listen to their horse too, because there's so much, you guys know this, there's so much out there around. If you ask the horse to do something, they better do it. And they better do it snappy. And don't let him get away with that, and all of that thought process. And so many people are surrounded by other people telling them that. Gotta ride the piss out of that horse so that she stops bucking you off. And I'm like, well, why is she bucking you off? Because she's
in the first place. Like,
she's miserable. So giving owners permission to listen to their horses and know that that's not going to ruin the horse. The horse isn't going to magically like take advantage of you. I had this conversation today. I was like, we have traditionally this thought process of like the horse would never do this if we didn't make them listen to us and do it. So we got to stay consistent. We got to get after them. Otherwise, there's no way in our minds they would ever want to do this thing. I'm like, how can we feel good about asking them to do something that they would never ever want to do?
Yeah.
Like that's crazy. But they will want to do it if we approach it from this other side of like, can I make this fun for you? Can I make this worth your time, even if it's never going to be fun, like a blood draw? Like, how can I make you want to participate in this and make it enjoyable in some way and make it beneficial for both of us? But you have to then listen when they say I can't do it, you can't do it. So what can we change about the situation, make it a little bit easier in some way, physically or mentally, so that they can do it? Doesn't mean we just give up and say, I guess I'm never gonna do that again. But owners need the permission, I think, because everybody around them is telling them that that's insane.
Yeah.
Except for me.
Yeah. Yeah. It's but that is like the shift, within the industry where like tradition and how you're taught to do things is so ingrained and has been that way for so long, where I remember seeing it done other ways and being like, yeah, okay, well, there's like this piece at identity for me where all my entire client base were like horses that were going out showing, they were doing their things, but then would get fucked up and then they would come to me. So I had these very fit, very large warm bloods that are like going pre-St. George, but then decided fuck all this. I'm going to jump out of the dressage arena halfway through the test. Like they would just check out because by that time they're so fit and their minds are so blown, and then I'm like 5'1" and they're like, hey, here. And I'm like, okay, like those horses are freaking scary. And my identity was so tied into the fact that, oh yeah, I can make this horse, it's a problem horse. I can make this horse do all the things and I can fix it. And I was so like, so for me to look at any other way that would have been not traditional, it would have taken longer and would have all the other things. There was no way I would have done that because it was like, how is that serving my ego at all? Like imposter syndrome all day long, sure. But look how good I feel after I make this horse that no one else could make do. How I made them. I do think I had success with those horses because from a very foundational standpoint, I wanted them to feel safe with me. I was never like, you're going to do what I say. I felt like I was always coming from a place of like, I want you to feel good about doing this. But the techniques that I had were that of, I need to be able to manipulate your body. Like the horses that want to like, tighten their neck and freaking just rip the rope out of your hand. I'm only 5'1" and I don't like rope burn. So I needed to learn the timing of when your head gets right here. I know I can swing just a little bit and swing your ass out and teach you that you don't have control of your own body. I can take control of your body just because as a human, I can see when I can take advantage of that in that moment, so then they would just learn, oh, that was shocking, and then all of a sudden they're like, holy shit, like this human can make me fall down. This human can knock me off balance like this, so it was like not being done the right way. But it was like, if you were to tell me, oh, there's this better way at that point in my life, I'd have been like, who cares?
You
like,
had
feeding my ego right now. I need to look like a good trainer right now. So I'm going to do it this way. So it's a tough thing. And I think it's why it's so important that owners need to be the ones driving the advocacy around it and their expectations of, if you really care about your horse as your partner and you do want to go show, which is totally fine, the pressure on trainers to get it done faster and more efficiently and go win, it comes from, yes, your ego and your stuff, your peers, your other trainers that are showing, But a lot of it is driven by the owners having expectations that this needs to be done in this time frame because that's what other trainers do. And if you don't do it in this time frame, I'll take it to that trainer who can do it in that time frame. So
Yeah.
it's like a collective like thing that needs to happen on all the parts. So who knows? That's just
You
really
learned many
I would say
lessons in
even
that.
people who say they want me to do it and know how slow that means it might be, and how I might say now there's a physical thing I think that's underlying all of this that we have to address. I still have run into multiple situations where they weren't really ready for that. And Shayleigh knows exactly why, because I calling her like, oh my God, this is horrible. It's all falling apart. I can't help this horse. But it's a big shift, and I agree. It has to come from the owners because they, first of all, they have to have a solid understanding of what reality is now to have realistic goals and expectations of their horses. But also, like what you're saying, professionals having success with what they're doing. Why on earth would they get rid of all of that, become a beginner again, learn this whole new way of doing things, lose their income, potentially lose all of their clients? Everyone thinks they're crazy. Like, why on earth would you do that? I wouldn't either. I didn't until a whole other slew of reasons made me change the way I was doing things. So
But I think the horses guide you though, right? Like
oh,
you
yeah.
end up getting
Horses
that.
eventually just don't give you an option.
Yeah.
I was never gonna change with Forrest. Forrest was like, okay, you just ride me with 2 whips. I guess I'll just do it. And I had no desire to change what I was doing. Sometimes I didn't feel great about whacking him constantly while riding, but it was working. And I was getting the results, and trainers were telling me that I was doing better. And, why would I make that change?
Mhm.
And then I got one that didn't work with anymore.
Yep. That's when you get a biggie or a penny,
Yeah.
and you call it a personality
Yeah.
conflict.
I wanted a challenge, and I sure found one.
Yeah, that's so relatable. But I think of what Amber said about it's so interesting because I just had like a total I just had a total ego check moment just in that moment where you were like, I wanted the horses to feel safe with me. And you had that as your basis. And I was thinking about because I had to quit riding because I had so much, especially Kip, like he's my only rideable horse right now. I've had him for 10 years and he's like kind of the basis of everything for me. And I've ebbed and flowed through so much guilt with him, but especially around riding. And I think you just helped me unlock why, OMG. Because thought I always tell her, I'm like, these are so therapizing for me. But because you were like, I want the horse to feel safe with me. And yes, I can do all of these things. I did not feel that way. I'm realizing I was like, I want to feel this way when I'm on you. So I don't like what you're doing because I do not feel happy right now, or I do not feel good in this moment. And it's so wild because now I'm just like thinking of so many of my clients where I'm like, oh, I can relate to you. I feel so good. And I've never really known why. And now I'm like, oh, because it really is like you can tell yourself that you're like riding the horse because you want them to be healthier. You want them to have a nicer top line. You want them to do da 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 da. But really, it's like, I need you to make me feel better. And when you're not, like, there's this whole. So then Kip and I went through so many different things. And now I'm like, oh my gosh, this is the last piece, hopefully, to my guilt right now. And I can really work through some guilt on this and thank him. And then maybe I'll be able to ride him again. We'll see. Is there anything that you feel like you want to say to kind of complete the combo?
Oh, that's the hardest question you've asked me. We've gone down a lot of my good rabbit holes. That was really.
Do you want to talk about feet at all and the importance of them and how?
I can. I don't know where that will
let
go.
me ask a question. I don't know if this is the right question. We can edit it out if we need to. But like, is there a certain source of pain in the body that is like chronic, and I have my own opinion on this, but I'm actually truly curious about yours. that gets like downplayed or overlooked
Oh.
like consistently. And I'm not saying just by like, you know, like vets and stuff, because everybody's doing their
No.
best, obviously.
My answer is literally all of it.
Okay.
But we tend to say things like, oh, he just had a little hook in his molars, so it wasn't that big of a deal. Or, oh, his soles are a little thin, he's fine. Or his back was a little sore after that ride, no big deal. And like sometimes that is true. And I'm not trying to say we need to like blow stuff out of proportion and nitpick every little thing, because that's its own separate terrible problem that people can fall into. But we can't decide for the horse how big of a deal it is. Just because it looks like a little deal, or sometimes it looks terrible and the horse is actually pretty okay. Like, we don't get to decide how the horse feels. We need to be able to hear them when they say, that little hook in my molar was a big fucking deal. And we're like, okay, it looked small, but it impacted you in a big way. I hear that. And rather than assigning value to it ourselves.
Yeah, I love that. That's really good. I talked to a horse today actually that really aligns with, because the person said like, oh, the feet aren't that bad. According to the farrier, like the angles are just a little off or whatever. And the horse was like, these feet are trapping my entire body.
Yeah.
Like this is horrible.
You're speaking again to my morning, because that was a horse where the horse couldn't pick her feet up. She refused to pick her feet up. She's yanking them away. And they're like, well, her rads are normal. The vet said the rads are normal. It's not her feet. And I'm like, it's her fucking feet. It's her feet. Like, she can't pick them up. It's her feet. And now her feet are more comfortable. And I got to pick her feet up today. And it was glorious. She was perfectly willing. No hesitate. Well, a little hesitation because she wasn't sure what I was going to do. But once she realized what was happening, perfectly willing. And I'm like, you didn't have to beat this horse or work something out of her. It wasn't a behavioral problem. She's telling you her feet hurt. And so, yeah.
Yeah. Great point. Great conversation.
I wish that could just be like the normal. And I don't think that it is. It's always go straight to like, this is a behavioral issue. Can you fix it? And it's like, no, it's a communication. Why are we not just calling it what it is?
That mindset of like, we're just letting them get away with it and it's going to get worse. Because again, why would they let us pick their feet up unless we force them to? And that's just not true at all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are we complete?
I think so.
I didn't have to make any hard-hitting statements about the industry. I was like, I don't know how far she's gonna push me into saying things that maybe I'm not ready to say.
That can be part two. That can be part two.
Part two. Next.
So if people want to work with you or find your classes, all that fun stuff, how do they find you?
I'm on the internet. On Facebook and Instagram, I'm the Horse PT, or literally just my name, Barbara Parks. That's easy on Facebook. And then my main website is drbarbaraparks.com, but I also have my online education stuff, which is Imagine Equine Education.com. So Imagine after my sweet little wonkadoodle rehab that started it all. Yeah. So yeah, that's how you can find me.
Cool. And we'll put all the links in the notes and stuff too.
Perfect. All right. Well, cool. It was fun talking to you.
Yeah.
I just want to do podcasts like in real life.
I know. It feels weird that you're over there.
It's a bummer that you guys are so physically.
You needed that. We talk about that all the time. The universe put us far, far away from each other.
Yeah. We'd get nothing done, literally. Or we'd get everything done and it would be intense.
Yeah, exactly.
Too much. It would be too much.
Like an hour apart, not like.
Yeah. We'll see. We never know what'll happen. But all right. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah.